Hi, Joni here. In today's video, I interview Hi-Fi from the Radicalized podcast. With a few other people, he was among the first people to realize the threat coming from the PayPal Mafia. He has sacrificed a lot for his activism, and in this interview, he tells us his story. We talk about how he got there, and also about Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, the PayPal Mafia, and what can be done to stop them. But before that, I'd like to briefly remind you about the new fundraiser that I launched for Ukraine. The fundraiser has started extremely well and we have already reached over 30% of our goal in just a few days. Huge thanks to everyone who has participated so far. Let's continue with this momentum and try to finish this fundraiser as soon as possible because the Ukrainian troops really need the trucks. Every donation counts, even small ones. And once again, we have launched a website with more information about the fundraiser. That's also where you can donate and see the patches that you can get by donating money. The link to the website is on the description below. Please donate and share if you can. Thank you. Slava Ukraini. And now let's get to the interview. So in today's video, we will talk about Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and the PayPal Mafia and everything that goes around it. And we're lucky to have Hi-Fi with us, who is one of the few people who actually got this right from the beginning already years ago. And to start the video, please, Hi-Fi, could you introduce yourself?
Thank you for having me, Joni. Let me introduce myself. I am an IT technologist. I'm an IT specialist. I have been in the technology field for 26 years. For the last 11 years, I've been working in Silicon Valley with large software vendors, large storage vendors, consulting companies. I make, build, troubleshoot, and fix large multinational networks for anything from Fortune 250 companies to universities to governments, different governments across the world. So that's some of the
That's,
things I do.
that's great. And how did you end up getting into all this that is related to Elon Musk and the PayPal Mafia and so on? How did you end up finding out about all these issues back in the days?
So it actually started on August 28th, 2020, when I found a fundraiser for a young man named Kyle Rittenhouse, and I don't really care about Kyle Rittenhouse. What I cared about was that the fundraiser should be taken down. And I contacted the Christian fundraising site, Give Send Go, and I said, hey, this kind of violates your own terms of service. You should take it down. And they told me no. So I looked into it more and I identified that the fundraiser had nothing to do with Rittenhouse whatsoever. It was run by two what appeared to me to be dirty attorneys. And one was a guy named John M. Pierce, who turned out to be $70 million in debt. He was removed from the fundraiser. The other guy was a guy named Ellen Wood, and he was deeply into QAnon. And so, just investigating those two people, I found three members of the PayPal Mafia involved: Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Joseph Lonsdale, and I also found a Russian oligarch by the name of Sergei Grishin, who was the business partner of one of them, had worked with the attorneys. What's funny is both of the attorneys were attached to different members of the PayPal Mafia, but always in like a controlled opposition footing. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Ellen Wood appeared against Joe Lonsdale in a case called Clarity v. Lonsdale. Really kind of horrific circumstances. I won't go too deeply into it. But Ellen Wood was on Elise Clarity's team, and she lost the case. Then you fast forward a little bit, and Ellen Wood had as a client burn-in pedo cave guy Unsworth, right? Um, and he was suing Elon Musk, and his representation was Ellen Wood, and he lost again. So that's that connection. And then it turns out that John M. Pierce represented this Russian oligarch, Sergei Grishin, in court proceedings against his ex wife and her business partner. And there's a whole bunch of networking going on here that I'm seeing that causes alarms
Mm-hmm.
for me. and other people I talk to about this. And so I started going after Sergey Grishin, and he actually filed a fraudulent DMCA takedown against me on Twitter and got me kicked off of Twitter the first time.
When was that?
That was November 11th, roughly, 2020. I have the email. I'll forward it to you. Maybe we can show it
Yep.
to your audience.
Yep.
Because, yeah, I'll show you his name and everything. But anyway, he went after me. He got me kicked off of Twitter. Twitter did not respond to my DMCA response. Instead, they suspended my account. So I simply created another one and went right back after Grishin and Lonsdale and Musk and Peter Thiel, who I'm not even saying I have definitive proof that they are involved, but the patterns of activity that they have engaged in lead me to believe that they have engaged in money laundering online, both through crypto and online fundraising. I believe they have engaged in psychological operations against not just Americans, but people of all democracies. Anywhere where QAnon or conspiracy theories were taking hold since about 2016, 2015. That is this network. The people who built Facebook, the people who, well, Elon Musk has purchased Twitter outright, and how many billions of dollars has he earned on that? Right.
A lot.
These are the people behind Brexit. These are the
Yep.
people behind Trump's election in 2016. So it's Silicon Valley, people in Silicon Valley, specifically PayPal Mafia, in conjunction with Russian money, specifically Yuri Milner, who is a bagman for a guy named Uzmanov, and another fellow who got me kicked off of Twitter, Sergey Grishin. And that's how I got involved.
That's interesting. I remember we talked yesterday when preparing this about how this started already, at least in 2000, if not earlier. But you could say that it potentially started around 2000 or so. Could you tell us a tiny bit more about that, on how this whole thing started around 25 years ago?
So what I sent you was a podcast I did with my other podcast co-host, Heidi Signakuda. She's over at Betty, Bette, dangerous.com. And the title of the podcast was 20 Years of Internet Espionage.
Yeah.
Because basically what has been occurring, if you consider the hacking, the leaks, the bots, which are just code that's released on the internet, when you consider the troll farms, which are just, digital marketing companies, they have this facade. In 2000, Peter Thiel, he invested the first $500,000 into Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook. And that is why I say that's really the start of this. Because Facebook then becomes a weapon, not just for, and as we heard J.D. Vance lie, it's not just about buying political ads. That's not the only thing they did, right? They created groups where they brought people in. They fed them radicalizing propaganda in the form of conspiracy theories, and in some of the more egregious attempts of what has been done, they would use something called traumatizing dissociative propaganda, which literally causes people to dissociate, puts them in kind of a DSM-4 state for dissociation, and then makes them easily persuadable. So you terrify someone, you break their brain with fear, and then you fill it full of the answer, which in this case was, trust the plan, trust Q, Donald Trump. And he will save you from the satanic democratic cabal of blood drinking pedophiles. Right? Well, this was all an operation. And it started when Peter Thiel put down that first $500,000 of Robert Mercer's money into Facebook.
Yeah.
So that's
And Peter Thiel was one of the only guys in the Silicon Valley in Trump's first term that was already backing him, I guess, because in 2024 there were quite a lot, but back in the days, 8 years ago, it wasn't so common in that world. So do you think that Peter Thiel, for those who don't know, because a lot of people who are watching this probably don't know all the relationships between these people. First of all, could you talk a tiny bit more about the PayPal Mafia and maybe about Peter Thiel's role in all of this?
Certainly. So Peter Thiel, when it comes to the PayPal Mafia, um, he founded uh, PayPal with a Russian fellow. I forget his name. It escapes me currently. Max something.
Hmm.
Max Levchin. Sorry.
Hmm.
So Peter Thiel, Max Levchin, and there were a couple other people. Uh, but they started this financial transaction company. And Elon Musk also had a financial transaction company that was called X, oddly enough. And so Peter Thiel and Elon Musk said, hey, let's merge these. Max Levchin said, yeah, let's do that. And that became PayPal. And so they built PayPal into this financial transaction company. And that was then purchased by an Iranian by the name of Pierre Omidyar, eBay guy. All right. That gave Musk and Thiel their first billions of dollars, right? Selling PayPal. 500,000 of that, is into Facebook, and that's when things start to get really kind of interesting because how Facebook was used. Um, Cambridge Analytica would say, give us 10 likes and we'll know you pretty well. Give us 1,000 likes and we'll know you better than your wife, right?
Yeah.
So it was a data gathering tool. They were learning about people, and if you don't understand the data science between data correlation and tracking people for marketing, and you know, it's out there. There's a movie actually on YouTube called "Data and Disinformation:
Hmm.
Investigating Cambridge Analytica" by Dr. Charles Creel and Kat Gellin, and it explains the whole thing. It breaks it down beautifully.
Yeah. And when you look at what you just said and you look at Elon Musk with Doge right now, getting access to all sorts of data from people through these federal agencies, what do you think about it? Do you think that there is a link?
Absolutely. I think that let's be honest about what we witnessed. If he does have access to everyone's social security numbers and banking information and credit card information and tax information and all of this, the biggest thing I can see that enabling is financial fraud, moving money around invisibly, either in the name of people under new accounts or in the name of people using existing accounts because he now knows, I know your account number, I know your social security number, I know your PIN, right? All that fun stuff. Um, so it's a data heist. It's a data heist that will perpetrate a massive, massive amount of fraud. And unfortunately for the United States, it's probably going to require completely revamping their social security system into a different format, delivered in a different way.
Do you think that that explains why he's using these 19-year-old and 23-year-old and all these young guys who have no experience and who are probably kind of following blindly when he tells them to do things? Do you think that's because he knows that they're doing something illegal, or that, and maybe some 35-year-old guy wouldn't do it, or why do you think that he's using these young Palantir interns to do the job?
Well, he's using evil minions, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about what we know about Cora Stein, right? Cora Stein was someone who hung out in the Com. And if you don't know what the Com is a loose assortment of different vile online gangs, predominantly engaged in pedophilia, self harm of minors, convincing minors to cut themselves, commit suicide, shave their heads, attention seeking behaviors that are destructive to the child. So Satanists, Nazis, satanic Nazis. If you ever look into one called 764 that Korestein was part of, they were literally satanic Nazis. And now Korestein is serving as a senior advisor at the State Department. So I don't know what that tells you about the type of people
Yeah.
Elon Musk chooses, but
And if we go back a couple of years, we first talked about the very beginning of this, and then we talked about what they're doing now with Doge. But if you look at what they managed to do now with Donald Trump, let's say the last couple of years, how they managed to kind of seize power through him. A lot of people who don't necessarily follow as much did not see this coming, and they did not expect that everything was planned, or they probably just thought that Elon Musk and the guys are just trying to push their interests and improvise a bit. But people like you and others who saw this ahead of time and who saw some patterns and started worrying about it realized that this is not random and this is not some improvisation by Elon Musk, that there is a plan behind all of this. What do you think about what's happened in the last, let's say, year or two, and how they managed to seize power in the US?
I think they were incredibly successful in co-opting the forces that should have held them to account. I think they put up enough of a fuss. They screamed so loudly about how people of January 6th in DC who attempted a coup on this country, no, 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 they were political prisoners. And this is where we start getting into this cognitive warfare bit.
Mm,
Because when you say that the January 6th attempted coup participants are political prisoners, you're engaging in a false reality, right? Um,
yep.
you and I would call it, something like Ruski Mir. It's this
Mm,
it's this false world of Russian lies that a lot of people are still caught in, even if they're not in it completely. There
yep.
could be people who I don't like Donald Trump, but Elon Musk is a genius, right? Or there could be I don't like Elon Musk, but I love Donald Trump, and he'll do the right thing for America, right?
Yeah.
The reality isn't completely solidified, but when Trump says things like Zelensky's a dictator, that's from the world of Russian lies. This Ruski Mir, right?
Yeah.
Um, and how does it feel to watch it over the last 2 years? So um, I figured this out at the end of August, early September of 2020, and I met my other podcast partner, Jim Stewartson, who you can find him over at mind-war.com, mind-war.com. And he was going after QAnon because he recognized that QAnon was using tactics that he had created, which were augmented reality games, altered reality games, right? And Q was using these, but they were actually using them to mess with people's minds and cause these literal mental conditions in people. So Jim was speaking out against this. And as I was examining Eldon Wood and his ties to QAnon, I also, the network that I found of billionaires and Russians and these dirty attorneys and what I thought was online money laundering overlapped with Jim Stewartson's network of who's running QAnon. So I met Jim, and then out of nowhere, and this is where things get really weird, a few members of the Anonymous Hacking Collective showed up. But that's a whole nother podcast we'll do sometime.
Yeah.
And,
No,
and
that's interesting.
just, yeah, since 2020, we've been seeing this, and we've been trying to sound the alarm, and people have just not been listening. But it's funny that now that, Trump's second go round is here, and the Fourth Reich is being established, and the liberal progressive democracy that was America is being dismantled, I don't feel very upset. I'm like, I told you. I'm
Yeah.
not. Why are you surprised? Right?
Yeah.
It's kind of
It
confusing.
must be a very weird feeling, as we discussed before we do, to have been saying something for so long with so few people actually taking it seriously or understanding or believing it. And then suddenly, a couple of years later, everyone starts to slowly wake up and realize that you were actually right and you were on the right path. Must be a very weird feeling in a way, because people always like to be right, obviously, but there's much more to that, and it has personal implications for life in general as well.
There there were a lot of sacrifices made, both by my podcast co-hosts Heidi Kuda and Jim Stewartson. I mean, Heidi had to she had to leave the country because they were male stalkers showing up outside her apartment building. This is Gamergate tactics, right?
Yeah.
The tactics of the Gamergate trolls. But it also goes a little bit farther in that this is the Zersetzung tactics of the Stasi in Germany, right? They scared the woman out of her home. She has now fled the country. She is residing in Europe. Can't say where, but um, Jim Stewartson has lost his. Well, he hasn't lost his career, but his career has been put on hold. He's been put through serious financial difficulty. He's been chased out of jobs by trolls. Um, I personally have. Uh, I've been chased out of a job. I lost a $200,000 a year job because of this. I've taken hits to my career. My marriage, which I'll admit it was rocky, but that did not survive this. I actually have a text that says, "I hope Sergey Grishin was worth it," because ultimately, after I started going after Sergey Grishin, 2 years and 7 months, he wound up dead back in Moscow. He had been lured back by the Russian government, and his death was strange. It was reported by Baza Media, which, if you know anything about Russian media, is the closest media to Russian military intelligence, like GRU, SVR, FSB. Um, I don't know if Sergei Grishin was worth it. I do know this. I do understand how the character Cassandra in mythology, was cursed by the god Apollo uh, for her prophecies to always be correct, but for no one to ever believe her.
Hmm.
And I can kind of feel that.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
must be tough, and it's hard to understand for those who have not gone through what you and your friends have gone through. Now that we are in this situation and that people are slowly starting to realize that you were actually not crazy and you actually saw something that they could have seen, but they just chose not to or did not believe. Now that people are starting to finally realize to this, what do you think is the likelihood that people will manage to organize and somehow stop this before it's too late?
We have one hope and one hope alone. Um, and Macron's trying to take the reins. Starmer's trying to take the reins. Honestly, I think Peter Pavel from Chechnya should take the reins. He's the only one with a military acumen, as far as I can tell. The rest are just kind of politicians and businessmen. Uh, the EU and NATO has to crush Putin. They have to destroy him. Russia must be dismantled. It can no longer be a nation. It can be a state, but a very small state managed by someone else. Because you can no longer trust Russian military intelligence, the Russian people, Russian politicians. They live fully in that world of Russian lies, that Ruski Mir. And until that world is completely crushed and destroyed and removed from existence, it will always be a threat.
And what you say implies that behind this PayPal Mafia and this group of people who have managed to take over in the US, the final boss, the main boss is still Russia, and Russia is behind all of this, as uh, you know, and I know. But I think a lot of people don't realize this, and I think you said something interesting about the Russia hoax when we talked.
Well, so it's this is what people need to realize. This is not just Russia against everyone. No, 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 no. This is Russia. This is UAE, Saudi Arabia, certain conservative elements inside of Israel, China. This is authoritarian governments banding together, using their wealth to engage in hybrid warfare against democracies. Russia is the most obvious because they have engaged in kinetic warfare in Ukraine and they are committing war crimes. They are raping, they are torturing, they are kidnapping children, they are murdering, they are hunting civilians with drones. Putin and Russia are the most obviously acting members of this Axis power, this authoritarian strongman fascist movement, which is attacking liberal democracies globally. Until people see that and understand that, and this is why Russia was effective, because there's a little bit of truth in Donald Trump's lie. It was not all just Russia. There were Americans involved. There were Europeans involved. There were Saudi Arabians involved. There were obviously Russians. There were Chinese involved. There were, it was a multinational network of people engaged in these psychological operations and real world operations against people. Putin has his Tutushki, right? If you look at Portland in 2020, well, we have the Proud Boys and Antifa, which I would argue neither of those are wholly organic. They may have grown organically, but I highly doubt they were started organically. As a matter of fact, we know the Proud Boys weren't organic because they were started by Gavin McInnes of Vice Media, right? That was, anyway, same old story, different country, same
Yeah,
playbook. People just need to recognize it.
I have two final questions for you that kind of go together. Um, First of all, for people who watch this video and who don't necessarily know so much about this subject, where would you advise them to go? What should they watch or read to understand what's going on and to wake up to this massive issue? What would be something that they should do to inform themselves? Obviously, there isn't one book or one video or something that can change everything, but where should they start to understand these networks and why what's happening is happening?
Well, I think, if you just look around at politics today, you see the playbook. You see there's always a billionaire, whether it's Abramovich in the UK or Ivanishvili in Georgia or Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Donald Trump, Joe Lonsdale in America, right? These billionaires are created. These billionaires wield vast wealth and vast power, and then they use those to subvert the countries. They subvert the media, right? They subvert they subverted social media. That's pretty dang obvious. And they create these. They use private intelligence companies and digital media, and they create these spectacles that sway people and the way they think and the way they vote. And people say, well, that's ridiculous. No one can sway me in the way I think and the way I vote. Look, just because, as Dr. Charles Creel said, just because someone attempted murder doesn't mean they committed murder. It just means they're really bad at committing murder. They still engaged in a crime. And that's what these billionaires are doing. Where should someone look I think the first thing you could do is you can watch. There's a documentary by a fellow named Jack Bryan
Hmm.
called Active Measures, and you can watch that online for free. You can watch it on some different free streaming services as well. So Active Measures is good. That is based off the work of Craig Unger, and Craig Unger wrote two books. One is called House of Putin, House of Trump, or I'm sorry, House of Trump, House of Putin, and the other one is called American Compromat. Those are quite good. If you want to chase the religious aspect of this, because that's something people don't really understand. This is not just digital. This is not just Silicon Valley, right? There's also there's technology. There's a Christian nationalist element that's split into two branches, which is like hardcore Catholicism and the evangelical movement. It's like I said, it's a very complex network of things, movements, people, organizations, institutions that are involved in this. Um, if you want to read about the religious part, Nancy McLean's Democracy in Chains, uh, Gareth Gore's Opus Dei. Opus Dei is connected to Leonard Leo, who calls himself a member of Opus Dei and a Knight of Malta, which are these bizarre cosplaying hardcore sects inside the Catholic Church. Like
Hmm.
70% of Catholics do not agree with this 30% of these
Yeah.
nut jobs wearing big fancy cloaks, right?
Oh.
Um,
Was it Eric Prince
but
was also linked to those guys, or yeah, and
yes,
also
Eric
the
Prince. Eric
also
Prince
the
is with
lawyer.
him.
What's her name? The Trump's lawyer, the
Oh,
woman.
Elena Hababa, or
She's
yeah,
also related.
Elena. Yeah, Elena. I forget her last name. How to pronounce it correctly?
Haba or
Elena
something. Yeah,
Haba. Yeah,
yeah.
she's connected to the Knights of Malta. There's a very specific cult for her. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard, who is now the director of national intelligence. She's in charge of all 17 of United States intelligence agencies. She belongs to, I kid you not, a toenail eating Hare Krishna sect.
Yeah.
The, the leader of her sect insists that his followers grind up his trimmed toenails, put them on their food, and eat it. So that's great. I just,
It's crazy.
and
And
she associates with war criminals and Nazis, and yeah, that's wonderful. That's just great.
what you said is
It's ridiculous.
what you said is too interesting. So I lied. It wasn't two questions. It was three questions. So I have two left because there's one new one that came to me. Uh, Actually, you talked about all these things, and one thing that comes to my mind is managed opposition, because that's something that most people don't understand much about and don't realize that when they are on Twitter or X or anywhere and they see some people who are influencing there, not everyone is doing it in good faith, even in people who are actually opposing Trump and all these people. Do you have any ways for people to recognize when that is going on? So some way to somehow understand that this might be managed opposition. Of course, it's hard to prove, and we don't know, and it's impossible to not become paranoid if seeing it everywhere. But there is some managed opposition, and it plays a big role in all of this. So I think you're the right person to answer that question.
Well, there's a lot of behaviors. Um, there's a lot of behaviors that one can look for when it comes to is someone managed opposition. The first one is to watch the person's behavior and if they engage in divide and conquer tactics inside a group or on social media. If they'll like, hey, I'm all for, Hamas and Palestine and there's a genocide and Israel's doing it and it's America's fault and anyone who doesn't support my position can go to hell. That's like a purity test. That is a splitting position, right?
Yeah,
Um, I support Ukraine, but Donald Trump is right. We gave him $250 billion. Well, no, Donald
yeah,
Trump is not correct. The problem is discerning the lies of the Russian world from reality, right?
mm,
And you can't really discern it from one source. If you let one person tell you everything, you're not getting adequate information. All right, so believing someone wholeheartedly when they say, I don't trust this person. I don't trust that person. I mean, I'll tell you, I don't trust certain people, and then I'll leave it at that. But if you
Yep.
constantly harangue that person, or you are constantly in that person's face, are you a good actor or not? I don't know. Especially if you're both supposedly on the same side, right? When you
Mm,
see these leftists who are like, um, if you don't support Palestine, I can't be your friend, right? And why should I
yeah.
listen? Who cares about Ukraine when Israel's
Mm,
murdering Palestinians? Well, no, you have to care about both things,
yeah.
and it's a lie to say you can't care about both. Um, well, you know, NATO started it. Well, that's a Russian lie. NATO did not
Yeah.
start it. Other countries asked to join NATO because Russia's a god awful neighbor, right? Um, and it just
There's recently
it's
I've seen sorry, I've seen a lot of
no, no,
cases
go
of
ahead.
people who are pro Ukraine and who are maybe more of this conservative sphere and who might be managed opposition and who somewhat always defend Ukraine, except now they're saying that Zelensky should be ousted because he was not wearing a suit and because he did not go on his knees in front of Donald Trump in the Oval Office. And these same people obviously have double standards on other issues. They will never talk about Elon Musk being in a T-shirt in the Oval Office or things like that. But those are probably the type of people that come to my mind when I see that. It makes me wonder: are these people managed opposition, or are they just people with double standards? It's hard to tell. But once people have read and read a bit more about these issues, and they are a bit more aware, and they've maybe realized that there are networks behind this, and it's not random that these things are happening. Now that there are Americans who are starting to wake up, and Europeans as well, what do you think that normal people can do? Someone normal who has, I don't know, no big following, no big financial resources. What could people do to have an impact, even a small one, to stop these people from what they're doing?
We talk about small acts of resistance, right? I saw one guy who just he printed up, like 100 black and white flyers that just said Putin owns Trump, and he put them up on a bunch of telephone poles around his city, right?
Yeah,
Just small acts of resistance like that. Call your representatives.
yeah,
And this applies to anyone. Anyone who lives in a representative democracy should be calling their representatives and demanding we back Ukraine, demanding that Putin be destroyed, demanding that Russia and Putin and his government be held accountable for the war crimes that they have perpetrated. You know what? Call them about Netanyahu too. Let's not lie. Netanyahu's a war criminal as well. He should be held to account. I'm all for it, right? Um, it's hard because there's so much happening so fast, and that's kind of the point of this strategy is to overwhelm people. Steve Bannon talks about muzzle velocity, right? Hitting something hard and fast. Well, that's the thing. People are not used to this.
yeah.
Our grandparents had to fight in World War II. My grandfather, one of my grandfathers, was in the Navy in the Pacific Theater. My grandmother lost two husbands. One was a pilot and one was a flight instructor during the war. Um, our grandparents fought fascism. They knew what fascism was. They understood it. Things got muddled kind of in our parents' generation because we didn't have really like great wars. We just had these anti-communism, Vietnam,
Hmm.
Korea, right? There were still colonial wars going on in Africa. Why are we even in Africa anymore? Whatever. You look at like France and Morocco in the 60s and things like that. Then you look at our generation, Gen X, millennials on down. We I grew up on the streets, and I used to punch a lot of Nazis in the face when I was a kid because we had that kind of crap where I grew up, and we were the punk rockers, and they were the fascists, and you beat up the fascists. That's just the way it was. And people after that really don't have it. Got to have freedom of speech, and fascists should be allowed to speak their minds. And I would disagree because when fascists speak their minds, people die and people suffer and people get hurt. So I believe in punching fascists in the face. That's just how I was raised.
No, that's a good way to be raised. And yeah, thanks a lot. Everything you said is extremely interesting, and I'm sure it will be very valuable for the people who watch this video. And massive thanks for your time, Hi-Fi. This has been really interesting, and hopefully we'll be able to do another video at some point where we can go more in detail, because obviously a lot of people who are watching this video don't know much about this subject. So it's great that we stayed at this higher level to kind of describe the issues, but obviously you're someone who knows much more about the details as well, and I'd be very happy one day to make a video where you get to talk more about the details. And people who are watching this video can also look on YouTube and find other videos, for example, from the Radicalized podcast, where you are talking about this more in detail, and that's a great podcast where I've been lucky to also be invited twice in the past. And yeah, but thank you for your time. This has been great.
Thank you, Joni.